Hello, everybody. So, Gaz Ware again, and this is part 3 of our series to do with architecture planning and projects. So, I'm Gaz Ware from GK Property Training Secrets. Again, we've got the amazing Jo Parker Liddle, who is giving up her time again for you to then try and teach you how to do land. And what we're going to do is we're going to again pass over to Jo to do a bit of a presentation. In this one, it's all about land. So, again, about the architecture, about the processes of getting land, some of the pitfalls that you can look after. And it's going to be another project where it's live. I say live, there was a previous live one, but what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to see things real time and maybe get more of an appreciation. But thanks, Jo. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I hope everybody gets some value from it.
Of course they will. Of course they will. We're here to add value, and that's the whole point of this. So thanks very much. Over to you, Jo. Let's start presenting.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next instalment of Architecture and Planning. This time we're going to be talking about land. Land is a vast subject, and I could go on for hours and hours about this, and you've probably been none the wiser. So I'm just going to condense it into something that you'll probably come across as a property investor, and that will be small backfill plots or infill plots. So this is areas of land where it's in somebody's back garden, and you're going to chop a chunk off and put a house on it. Or a infill plot is where there's a piece of land in between some existing properties. Now, when you're looking at a land, there's a few things that you really do need to look at. What's the category of the land, for instance? Is it in greenbelt? There's going to be lots of other things that need to be looked at before you can decide if it's viable to build on. Is it a brownfield site? You know, what was the previous use? Maybe was something kind of high impact with chemical use, you know, like a former factory or something, and actually making the ground safe to build a residential plot on, for instance, might not be the best use of that land. There's also other bits and bobs to look at. Is it within the town, village, or city settlement boundary? Because if it's not, it's going to be more difficult to get planning on there. And is it within the local authority's development area? If it is, that's going to be even better to get planning on because they're already looking at building in that area. Is it in a flood risk? Because there's loads of things to consider. If there's a flood risk, it might not even be worth looking at doing that. So, yeah, for purposes of this little video, I'm going to show you an example again. Just share my screen with you. Now, this is a tiny little, well, I say tiny, this is somebody's backyard. Actually, in terms of a back garden, it's a big back garden, but it's enough to put probably one house on because there's so many other things that you need to consider on this plot, as well as how big is your house going to be. First of all, is there road access? Now, in this case, this road actually comes up here across the front of the property and down the side. So yeah, there is direct road access, but it's not just about what the road access is. Has it got a decent amount of visibility? Because people that are pulling out of this new dwelling will need to be able to see the traffic coming either way. So you might need to consult highways on that, or even talk to a transport advisor, a transport consultant, just to see if it's suitable for putting a dwelling there. The other things that you need to think about are the impact on the neighbouring dwellings. So we have what's called a 45-degree rule. Might be worth having a bit of a Google of that if you want to find out a bit more. But basically, on your neighbour's house, where the windows are, you need to draw a 45-degree line, usually from the middle, and anything within that you can build in. Anything over that, you're going to be overshadowing them, you're going to be taking away the light. So this needs to be worked out when you're actually planning where this house is going to be. There's also things like making sure that you're not blocking up their access. And when you are looking at building on a garden, access is critically important. If you're going to buy up a bunch of back gardens, for instance, how are you going to get cars there? The roads need to be a certain, width depending on how many dwellings there are. But also, you can't take away somebody's existing drive and use that as your access. It's just not going to pass. So this particular job This council has really quite strict space standards. So this is something that you really need to look at properly. What are your local authorities' development guidelines? You know, what kind of planning policy do they have? What other planning applications have been, passed in the area, and what sort of things have they been asked to look at and consider? So do that research. You need to make sure that you're not having some kind of ecological impact on the site. So you can't just go in and destroy a load of ancient woodland or something like that. It's all stuff that needs to be considered properly. The other thing that you probably want to have a look at is the local authority's local plan, because they may have aims to have a certain amount of dwellings in that area over a certain period of time, which means that your application is going to be more favourable because that's actually what they want to do. They want to have more houses there. So yeah, these are things that you want to do in the background. Do your research properly before you even start to look at what you can fit on there. Here's a little view of the site plan. So if you want to know how big your house is going to be, the first thing you want to look at is the national minimum space standards. It doesn't give you necessarily sizes of what the room should be, but it does give you an internal space standard for however many bedrooms you've got and however many people are planning to be in this house. Because the one thing that you need to do when you're deciding when you're going to put on this plot is what's going to sell. I mean, it might be your dream home, in which case build whatever you want there, whatever you dream within kind of the local authorities' development standards, of course. But if you're doing this as an investment project, you've got to look at what's going to sell. So this particular one was actually a 4-bed detached, because it's very similar in the area. And the local authority in this case had their own minimum space standards. So this is something that you really need to check. Not only did they have certain sizes for rooms, they had certain sizes for overall space, and most importantly, amenity space. So nowadays, a lot of councils insist you have a certain amount of space for your garden or for outside space. But not only for the new build, we also had to make sure there was enough amenity space for the house we were taking some garden away from. But also parking. Parking is quite critical. A lot of councils have certain amounts of parking for a certain amount of bedrooms, and you need to make sure that they can see out the driveway, that they can turn comfortably and come out onto the main carriageway in a forward direction. The other thing to consider when looking at where the house is in relation to the road is how far away from the road it is. If it's more than 20 metres, you actually need to create a turning space for a fire engine. That's quite a big turning circle that you need to consider. The other thing that you're looking at when you're looking at houses in inbuilt areas is the distance of elevation to elevation. So, for instance, your main living rooms will need to be 21 metres on average away from another elevation living areas. To the side, it's usually around 14 metres, but these can be different in different local authorities, and you'll find these in their own individual development guidelines. So these are things to consider. Sometimes it's a case, like in this one, for instance, of tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until you get all the spaces to work. So, get somebody who really does know what they're doing, and somebody who knows what research that they need to do, what, desktop studies they need to do. Because there's no point putting pen to paper unless you've done that research in the background first. So, yeah, just a few little guidelines there. I mean, I could go on about this for hours and hours because there's so many things to consider when you're putting your application in. More often than not, if I'm not sure whether it's going to be accepted by the council, I'll put in an outline planning application. And that is just a site plan, very similar to the one I've just shown you, just to show where the parking is, how big the houses are, how the road's going to work. And that is just to see if they're open to us building there. And it's a more cost-efficient way of doing that, because there's nothing worse than going into detailed plans and then they turn around and say no, and you've already spent tens of thousands of pounds trying to make this happen. So do your research and use the tools that are there. A lot of local authorities will have pre-application advice. Some are free, some are not. Some are good, some are not. Some can take months to get back to you. So often putting an outline plan application could be quicker and a better way of finding out if this is a viable plot to build on. But otherwise, contact one of your local professionals, somebody that knows about planning. So either an architect or architectural technologist like myself, or you can speak to a planning consultant. We often work hand in hand, especially on plots that have a huge amount of housing. So you'd need some very, very complicated reports, and you'd need to make sure exactly what the pitfalls are before you even go ahead and start to look at whether this is going to work or not. So hopefully that's helped you so far. But yeah, as before, if you've got any questions, then obviously pop some comments in the box, and we may talk about, what you want to ask and go into more detail in another recording, another date. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jo. That was amazing. Totally appreciate you taking time out to try and add value to everybody. And of course, as it goes out, if you need any more information, please contact Jo. Please put it in the group. You're welcome to put it into comments. What we want to do is to keep you safe and keep you growing strong, but by understanding all the processes that keep you safe. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks very much again, Jo. Really, really appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome. Take care, everybody.